I knew something in my life had cracked the moment my phone lit up that night. My son's message was only 7 words, but they cut deeper than anything I had endured before. Do not come to dinner. Claire agrees. It felt like being erased from my own family. Less than 12 hours later, both of them barged into my office, eyes wide as they discovered who I truly was. That was the moment I realized the betrayal ran far deeper than rejection. It was planned, sharpened, and aimed straight at me. And the people I loved most were holding the knife. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're tuning in from. We love seeing how our stories connect people from all around the world. Your comments and thoughts bring this community to life, and we're so grateful to have you on this journey with us. If you have not already, do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a cozy seat, maybe a cup of coffee or tea, and prepare yourself for a tale that will captivate your heart from beginning to end. Let's begin. I have lived on King Street in Charleston, South Carolina, for so many years that the creak of the old wooden floorboards has begun to sound like a familiar voice. At 62, I often find myself moving through my federal-style townhouse as if tracing the outline of a life that once felt fuller, louder, and warmer. The high ceilings echo more than they should, and on quiet mornings, the faint hum of the Cooper River drifting through my windows reminds me of everything that has changed since I first moved here. My days begin the same way they have for over a decade, a cup of Earl Grey in the kitchen with sunlight filtering through wavy old glass panes, the newspaper folded neatly beside me, and a long exhale before the world intrudes again. There is a comfort in routines, but also a sharp kind of loneliness hiding underneath them. I built this house into a sanctuary after my husband's death, filling it with books, maritime maps, and the heavy furniture he once admired. Yet, even with every room looking perfectly curated, there are nights when the silence feels too large, like an ocean stretching beyond sight. My son Liam visits less often than he used to, and when he does, he brings a storm of tension with him. His wife Chloe wears discomfort like a perfume, heavy and impossible to ignore. Their presence rarely brings warmth, only a reminder that something between us has thinned over the years. Most people in my family still believe I work in a modest administrative role. That misconception has never bothered me. After decades as chief financial officer for a major New York medical conglomerate, I chose discretion over pride. When I relocated to Charleston and founded my private investment firm, Cole Harbor Investments, I made no effort to broadcast my success. I preferred quiet influence to loud recognition. The fewer people who envied me, the fewer people who would try to take advantage of what I had built. My office sits on the top floor of a boutique building near the waterfront. The walls are lined with dark wood shelving, filled with antique ledgers and framed charts of historical trade routes. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlook the harbor, where sailboats drift lazily on calm days and storms roll in with dramatic flair. My desk, made of polished walnut, holds my brass nameplate, Margaret Cole, Managing Director. Only a handful of people know what that title truly entails, and I have always preferred it that way. Despite the sharpness and precision I bring to my work, my personal life feels softer around the edges, worn by years of trying to keep the peace. Liam is the only child I have, and perhaps because of that, I have held on too tightly to the idea that he might one day understand the sacrifices I made. Chloe, with her immaculate appearance and fragile pride, has never attempted to hide her disdain for my quiet life or the values that shaped it. Gatherings with them feel strained, as though we are all pretending to be a family built on affection rather than obligation. Still, in the quiet of early mornings, before the phone rings and the day demands my attention, I let myself wonder what it would be like to have a different kind of closeness with them. Not one built on expectations or disappointment, but on genuine connection. Lately, that thought has lingered longer than usual, like a shadow refusing to fade. As I placed my teacup in the sink that morning and reached for my keys, a strange heaviness settled in my chest. Nothing had happened yet, nothing at all, but a sense of unease tightened around me. It whispered that the calm I had grown accustomed to was nothing more than a thin shell ready to crack. And deep down, I already knew a storm was coming. If you're still watching and this story is pulling you in, comment number 1 below so I know you're with me. Now let's move on to chapter 2. Morning air along the Charleston waterfront has a way of clinging to the skin, soft and cool, carrying the smell of salt that slips in through the cracks of the old windows in my office building. I arrived early that day, as I always do, letting the quiet lobby settle around me before the rhythm of work began. The marble floors reflected the dim light from the harbor, and the soft hum of the elevator felt almost meditative. I held a folder of contracts for an upcoming negotiation with a European medical technology group, a meeting that required precision, calm, and the kind of steady confidence I had spent my entire career cultivating. Stepping into my office, I felt the familiar comfort of order. My desk was arranged exactly the way I needed it, with my laptop centered, my notes aligned, and the brass nameplate gleaming against the walnut surface. The harbor outside the window was still wrapped in a thin layer of mist. Sailboats drifted slowly, and the early sun cast long streaks across the water. Inside, the faint scent of coffee drifted from the small machine near the bookshelf. Every morning, the room seemed to hold its breath until I broke the silence by opening my laptop. When I powered it on, the screen illuminated the room with a soft glow, and I began reviewing the agenda for the meeting. Numbers, graphs, and projections steadied me, creating a world where logic ruled and chaos stayed outside the door. Yet beneath that calm surface, a fragile thread of unease tugged at me. I could not explain it, but it had lingered since the night before. I adjusted the stack of documents on the table, rehearsing the points I intended to raise. My focus sharpened, and I started drafting a brief for the call. The quiet in the hallway felt heavier than usual, as if the building itself sensed something approaching. Then I heard a subtle shift in the air, a muffled commotion near the reception desk. Footsteps, hurried whispers, a chair sliding across the floor. I paused. My hand hovered over the keyboard. The energy in the hallway had changed from routine bustle to something uncertain and tense. A soft knock broke the silence. Sarah, my assistant for over a decade, peeked into the doorway. Her expression carried a tightness I did not often see. She rarely allowed emotion to reach her eyes, yet that morning they were shadowed with worry. She told me that 2 people were insisting on seeing me. They insisted they were family and refused to wait outside. Every muscle in my body stiffened. I had no scheduled meeting with family, and none of them ever appeared without warning. I asked who they were, even though a cold, sinking certainty had already begun to settle in my chest. Sarah answered with hesitation. Liam and Chloe. The room seemed to tilt slightly. It made no sense for them to be here, especially at this hour, and especially on a day when my schedule was nearly airtight. I instructed Sarah to seat them in the waiting area for 10 minutes. I needed time to regain my composure before I faced whatever storm they carried. As she stepped out, I forced myself to breathe slowly, smoothing my jacket and closing unnecessary files on my screen. I launched the conference platform for the European meeting, attempting to anchor myself in professionalism. But before those 10 minutes passed, the office door swung open. Liam and Chloe stood framed by the doorway, their eyes wide as they took in my title displayed in polished brass. Their shock cut through the room like a blade, and I knew the calm of my morning had ended. If you're still watching and feeling the tension build, comment number 2 below, so I know you're following every twist. Now let's continue with chapter 3. The rest of the day carried a heaviness that clung to my shoulders long after Liam and Chloe stormed out of my office. Their sudden intrusion had left behind an uneasy silence, one that settled between the desks and hallways like dust after a collapse. I tried to redirect my mind toward work, returning to the figures and projections that usually grounded me, but my thoughts drifted again and again to the look on their faces when they saw my nameplate. I had always believed that secrecy protected me, yet in that moment, it had only widened the distance between us. Still, I forced myself back into the rhythm of the day, hoping logic and order would quiet the unease rising in my chest. It did not work. The disruption earlier had left a faint tremor in my nerves, and it grew stronger as the afternoon light shifted across my office floor. I was reviewing a set of quarterly statements when my phone rang. The number belonged to my bank's fraud department. I answered without hesitation, expecting a routine verification. Instead, the representative informed me that several loan applications had been submitted under my name within the past 2 weeks. 3 smaller ones had been automatically denied due to mismatched information, but one application for $200,000 had passed the first round of verification because the signature and personal data closely resembled mine. They needed confirmation before proceeding. A chill moved through me. I asked for the timestamps of the submissions, the device information, and copies of all the documents. The representative promised to email the files immediately and urged me to freeze my credit while the bank conducted a deeper review. I agreed, writing down every detail as calmly as I could. Years of corporate crisis management had taught me to remain steady in moments like these, yet no amount of training could numb the ache that formed in my stomach as the implications became clear. Someone had accessed my personal information. Someone had used my identity. Someone very close to me knew exactly what details would pass verification. When the call ended, I stared at the notepad in front of me. The dates the representative listed hovered in my mind. They matched too closely with the nights when Liam had appeared at my home unannounced, asking for simple favors, chatting about nothing, drifting through rooms as if searching for something to anchor himself. I wanted desperately to reject the possibility, to remind myself that he was still the gentle boy who once held my hand in crowded grocery stores. But the truth pressed against me with a weight that could not be ignored. Everything lined up too cleanly. I reached for my phone again and called Jack Miller. He had been a reliable investigator during a fraud case several years earlier, and I trusted his discretion more than anyone else's. I explained the situation briefly, keeping my voice steady, though it strained against the tremor forming beneath it. Jack listened, then promised to begin looking into access logs, neighborhood security cameras, and any potential breaches of my personal files. He also mentioned that Liam's financial records, which were partially public through debt collection filings, showed signs of significant strain. After the call, I sat alone in my office, surrounded by the familiar maps and ledgers that once represented control and certainty. Now they felt like relics from a life that had slipped out of alignment. The thought of Liam forging documents with my name struck me deeper than any financial loss ever could. It felt like betrayal in its purest form, a fracture in the foundation of trust that bound us. I rose from my chair and walked to the window, overlooking Charleston Harbor. The water was darkening as clouds gathered above it. What had always been a calming view now carried the weight of a warning. A storm was forming, and I knew it was only the beginning. If you're still watching, and the stakes are getting higher for you too, comment number 3 below to show you're still here. Now let's step into Chapter 4. The morning after the call from the bank began with a heaviness that settled deep in my chest, the kind that did not fade with coffee or sunlight. Charleston was wrapped in low gray clouds, and the air carried the stillness of an approaching storm. I arrived at the office earlier than usual, trying to steady myself with routine, yet every movement felt slightly out of sync, as if the ground beneath my life had shifted in the night. I forced myself to review the documents the bank had emailed, reading them line by line until the printed letters seemed to blur. Each forged stroke of my name felt like a small betrayal carved into paper. I went to the bank in person to face the situation directly. The representative from the fraud department, a patient man with tired eyes, walked me through each application. Together, we compared the forged signatures with my authentic ones. They were close enough to fool automated systems, but the flaws became visible when placed side by side. What unsettled me most was how detailed the personal information was. The applications included my former addresses, my mother's maiden name, and even references to private accounts that only a handful of people knew existed. The representative urged me to freeze my credit, change every password, and activate continuous monitoring on all accounts. I signed the authorization forms with a hand that felt heavier than usual. Returning to the office, I sat at my desk and opened my calendar. I searched for the dates the bank representative had mentioned, each one aligned with an evening when Liam had stopped by my home unexpectedly. He had always appeared with a harmless explanation, asking about family recipes, reminiscing, or claiming he needed someone to talk to. At the time, I welcomed the company and believed those moments were tiny attempts to repair the growing distance between us. Now, those same evenings felt like pieces of evidence falling into place, creating a pattern I did not want to see. I forced myself to breathe steadily as I closed the calendar. I called Jack Miller and provided the documents and every detail I had. His voice remained calm, but beneath that calmness was a tone shaped by experience. He asked about recent visitors, access to my home, anyone who might know where I kept my personal files. I answered every question truthfully, even when the answers made my chest tighten. Before ending the call, Jack warned me that cases involving family were almost always worse than the initial discovery. His words echoed in my mind long after I hung up. I attempted to continue my workday, sitting through meetings, reviewing expansion proposals, and approving vendor contracts. Yet my thoughts drifted constantly. The numbers and charts on my screen became mere shapes, stripped of meaning. Even my colleagues noticed my uncharacteristic quietness, though no one dared to ask. I kept my composure, but inside, something was unraveling. I questioned whether I had unknowingly created a distance so wide that my own son saw me not as a mother, but as a financial resource. The thought tightened my throat. Late in the afternoon, Jack called me again. He had begun digging into public records and uncovered a labyrinth of debt tied to Liam. The amounts were large enough to make my pulse quicken, and some were linked to lenders known for intimidation. It was the first concrete sign that desperation, not malice, might have pushed him toward choices I never imagined he would make. I sent Liam a short message, a simple question about how he was doing. Hours passed without a response. The silence felt louder than words. As evening fell, I met with Jack again, ready to map the next steps. We agreed that nothing could move forward without verified evidence. I needed clarity before confronting anyone. When I returned home, the city lights flickered across the water, reflecting my own sense of unease. My first attempts to restore order had accomplished nothing except revealing the depth of the problem. The storm had not yet arrived, but I could feel it gathering, and I knew the worst was still ahead. If you're still watching and the story has you hooked, comment number 4 below so I know you're staying with me. Now let's head into Chapter 5. Night had settled over the city by the time I finally ended my last meeting, leaving only the soft glow of my desk lamp illuminating the office. The stillness around me felt heavier than usual, as if the walls themselves anticipated what was coming. I tried to focus on the reports scattered across my table, but my mind drifted incessantly toward Jack's earlier message. His tone had been tense, almost urgent, when he asked to meet in person. By the time the elevator doors opened and he stepped out into the quiet hallway, I already sensed that something irreversible was about to unfold. Jack entered the room holding a large cardboard box. He placed it on the conference table and gently pushed it toward me before removing the lid. Dozens of folders spilled outward, pages filled with numbers, images, statements, and copies of records that looked painfully familiar. My pulse quickened as Jack began explaining what he had found. He spoke steadily, as someone accustomed to delivering unpleasant truths, but even he paused occasionally, as if the depth of the deception shocked him as well. The first set of documents detailed Liam's debts. They were far worse than I had imagined. Loans from multiple banks, collection notices, delinquent credit cards, and even borrowing from someone whose interest rates bordered on criminal. More than $300,000 tied to his name, some of it already in litigation. My throat tightened as I stared at the papers. I had always sensed Liam was struggling, but not to this catastrophic extent. It was as if he had been drowning while I watched from the shore without realizing he was calling for help. Then Jack moved to the next folder, and my breath faltered. Claire's records lay inside, revealing an identity rooted in manipulation. Her real name, her previous marriages, each ending in financial devastation for the men she left behind. There were photographs of her trailing me months ago, notes she had taken about my assets, and copies of public documents she had clearly studied long before meeting my son. She had planned every step, every smile, every touch. I felt a burning in my chest at the realization that the woman I had welcomed into my home had been calculating my downfall from the moment she first shook my hand. Jack unfolded a document next, a written blueprint of the scheme Claire and her partner had drafted. It outlined the stages of their plan with chilling clarity. They would isolate Liam, intensify his debts, fabricate a medical emergency, and then pressure me emotionally until I signed a legal authorization granting him control over certain assets. After that, they intended to liquidate properties and siphon funds through untraceable channels. Seeing my life reduced to checkboxes on a criminal to-do list was a kind of violation I had never imagined possible. But it was the twist that followed that shook me the most. Jack revealed a series of messages between Claire and a man named Barrett, a former board member with whom I had clashed years earlier. He had never forgiven me for supporting his removal after a series of ethical violations. Now he had resurfaced, supplying Claire with internal information and encouraging her to target me. It was not merely betrayal from within my family anymore. It was a coordinated attack built on resentment and greed. My hands trembled as I tried to absorb everything. Pain cut through me sharply, but beneath that pain grew something steadier, colder, a resolve I had not felt in years. I instructed Jack to create multiple sets of the evidence and prepare them for my attorney. If a war was coming, I needed every weapon available. He paused and asked if I was certain I wanted to continue, knowing there would be no turning back. I stared at the documents, the photographs, the proof of how deeply I had been deceived. I told him I had already lost my son. I would not lose myself. Sleep eluded me that night. I sat in the quiet of my living room, watching the lights of Charleston Harbor shimmer across the surface of the water, like scattered fragments of truth refusing to settle. The documents Jack had left on my dining table lay open, each page whispering a betrayal that felt heavier than the last. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, but no amount of warmth eased the cold settling in my chest. Every memory of Liam as a child drifted back to me. The way he used to run down the hallway with muddy shoes, the way he clung to my hand during thunderstorms, the tenderness in his voice when he would whisper that I was the best mother in the world. Those memories felt like they belonged to another lifetime. By 3 a.m, I found myself replaying the recordings Jack had given me. I listened to Claire's voice again, smooth and calculated, discussing my assets as if they were items on a shopping list. She described me as someone easily manipulated by emotion, someone predictable. I listened to her laugh as she outlined exactly how they would corner me into signing property documents. Each word sliced through whatever softness remained in me. Yet it was not anger alone that filled me. It was the ache of realizing how deeply I had misjudged the woman who had married my son. When I turned to the final file, my breath stalled. Jack had retrieved footage from a traffic camera showing Claire escorting Liam into the office of a known document forger. Liam's posture was tense, his gaze darting nervously to the ground. Claire pushed him forward, urging him to sign something out of the camera's view. For a moment, I saw fear in my son's body language, a kind of reluctance that contradicted the criminal determination I had accused him of in my thoughts. That image complicated everything. It showed he was not the mastermind I had believed him to be. He was lost, misguided, and painfully vulnerable to the influence of someone far more malicious. A part of me softened, but it did not erase the devastation he had caused. My heart was a battlefield of contradictions, torn between protecting the boy I raised and facing the reality of the man he had become. Every truth Jack revealed forced me closer to a choice I had avoided for too long. I could keep shielding Liam, convincing myself he would eventually return to reason, or I could take the necessary steps to protect myself and everything I had built. The first option felt like the path of a mother clinging to hope. The second felt like the decision of a woman who had finally accepted that survival sometimes required sacrifice. Near midnight, my phone buzzed. Liam's name appeared on the screen. I hesitated before answering. His voice was trembling, as though he were wrestling with a confession he could not bring himself to make. He murmured apologies that had no shape, no explanation, only the tone of someone standing on the edge of something dark. I listened quietly until the silence stretched and he ended the call. It left an ache so deep that I felt it through every breath. When dawn approached, I dressed and drove to the office, needing the stillness of the high-rise before anyone arrived. The sky outside the tall windows slowly lightened, painting the harbor in muted blue. I stood there for a long time, watching the city wake. My reflection stared back at me, tired yet resolute. In that moment, clarity finally arrived. I could not continue living in fear of what Liam or Claire might do next. I could not allow guilt to blind me to the danger circling my life. I called Jack just after 5. My voice did not tremble. I told him to move forward with everything: the evidence copies, the sealed files, the transfer to Patricia. There would be no turning back. Then I wrote a brief message to Liam, asking him to meet me the next day in a private conference room at the company. No accusations, no explanations, only a summons. Before leaving the office, I paused at the restroom mirror. I saw a woman weathered but unbroken. The decision had been made, and whatever came next, I would face it standing tall. If you're still watching and the climax hit you hard, comment number 6 below to let me know you're right here with me. Now let's move into Chapter 7. The next morning, I arrived at the office before the sun lifted itself over the horizon. The building was still and quiet, the kind of silence that carries its own gravity. I chose a smaller conference room instead of my office, a space without windows and without the eyes of anyone walking past. I closed the blinds, turned off the digital assistant installed on the table, and checked every corner as if preparing a sterile field before a delicate operation. My hands were steady, but my heart felt heavy as stone. I knew this conversation would mark a shift in my life, and in Liam's, one that could not be undone. When Liam entered, the exhaustion on his face struck me harder than any accusation ever could. His shoulders slumped inward, his clothes wrinkled, and his eyes carried dark shadows that suggested nights without rest. He tried to greet me, but the words barely formed. Instead, he stood there like a man waiting for a sentence he already feared. I gestured for him to sit, though I remained standing for a moment longer to keep myself grounded. I placed the sealed folder on the table and slid it toward him. I explained calmly that I knew everything: the debts, the forged signature attempts, the nights he entered my home to access documents, and the ways Claire had guided him deeper into the chaos. I kept my voice even, refusing to let anger or sorrow dictate the moment. It was not rage that sat between us now. It was truth. And truth can be more devastating than fury. Liam lowered his gaze to the table and seemed to shrink into his chair. He attempted to speak, but the explanations came out fractured and hollow. He admitted that he was overwhelmed, that he let Claire influence him, that he thought he could fix everything before I ever discovered the truth. He did not pretend to be innocent. It was the sincerity of his collapse that softened me, even if only slightly. He was not the architect of the scheme, but he had allowed himself to be a participant in his own undoing. I sat across from him and outlined the conditions my attorney and I had established. 5 non-negotiable rules that would determine whether he remained free or faced a prosecutor. He would cut all ties to Claire. He would undergo therapy 3 times a week. He would move out of the home that was never legally his. He would work full-time in the company warehouse, earning a modest salary and rebuilding discipline from the ground up. And over 10 years, he would repay the money he had jeopardized. If he violated any part of this agreement, I would release all evidence to the authorities. My voice did not waver as I declared it. Tears streamed down his face as he nodded, unable to form a coherent response. The image of my son crying in front of me pierced something deep inside, but I remained composed. Compassion did not erase consequences, and consequences were now essential for both of us to survive what had unfolded. Just as Liam left the room, my phone buzzed. It was Patricia. Her tone was sharp and controlled. Claire had filed a complaint against me, accusing me of threatening her, detaining her, and violating her privacy. She had even attempted to secure a protective order. The news struck me with a fresh blow. Claire was not retreating. She was attacking, using the legal system as her weapon. Patricia explained that Claire's timing revealed desperation, not strength. Still, it meant we had to accelerate our strategy. Every step forward would now be scrutinized. Every misstep could be turned against me. I thanked Patricia and hung up, feeling the weight of a new front opening in the battle. I stepped outside into the parking lot, letting the cold morning air hit my face. My body felt drained, but my resolve remained firm. This was not a story of money anymore. It was a fight for my integrity, my safety, and the truth. And I would not allow anyone, not Claire, not her accomplices, not even my own son, to strip that from me. When I returned home that evening, the air along Charleston Harbor carried a quiet chill that seeped through the windows of my townhouse. The stillness inside felt heavy, almost too gentle compared with the chaos unfolding around me. I placed my keys on the table and let myself stand there for a moment, breathing in the silence. It was the first moment alone I had allowed myself since everything began to collapse. I carried the box of documents to the dining table and spread each folder out until the entire surface became a map of the war I was fighting. From a distance, it almost looked organized, but as I stepped closer, I saw every wound, every betrayal, and every decision waiting to be made. I separated the evidence into 4 clear sections. One stack held Liam's debts and forged documents. Another contained Claire's past, littered with legal accusations and abandoned husbands. A third focused on Barrett, the man who had turned his resentment toward me into a personal crusade. The 4th pile held Claire's new accusations against me, each one more absurd than the last. Organizing them felt strangely therapeutic, as though giving structure to the chaos could restore some of the control I had lost. After a long pause, I opened my laptop for a late-night meeting with Patricia. She appeared on the screen, her expression steady and razor sharp. For nearly 2 hours, she dissected Claire's tactics and laid out our options. She advised gathering location data, identifying witnesses from Claire's previous schemes, and accelerating the process of filing our counterclaims. Her confidence helped reorient my thinking. I took notes, line by line, reminding myself that battles like this were won with precision, not emotion. When the call ended, I leaned back and my gaze drifted toward a framed photograph on the shelf. It captured a moment from years ago, just Liam and me on the front porch, both laughing at something I can no longer recall. The sight of that photograph broke whatever was left of the hardness inside me. Tears slipped down my face quietly, the kind that carry exhaustion rather than despair. I did not fight them. It was the release I needed before moving forward. The next morning, I arranged meetings with two of my most trusted department heads. I provided only the necessary information, explaining that the company might soon experience legal pressure from external sources. They assured me of their loyalty and preparedness to protect our operational integrity. Hearing their support fortified something in me. My personal world might be fractured, but my professional world still held strong pillars. That afternoon, I called Jack to discuss Claire's accusations. He had already begun tracing her whereabouts on the day she claimed I threatened her. Within hours, he found footage from multiple street cameras proving she had fabricated the entire story. She had not even been in the area she mentioned. The discovery offered a rare sense of relief, enough to loosen the tightness that had anchored itself in my chest for days. Later that evening, Liam called. His voice was quiet, almost fragile. He said he had moved out of Claire's apartment and attended his first therapy session. The conversation was short, steady, and without tears or accusations. I acknowledged what he said but did not offer forgiveness. It was too soon for that. Still, something in me recognized the small step he had taken. With renewed clarity, I sat down and created a plan. First, destroy Claire's false accusations through evidence and testimony. Second, move forward with filing charges against her for fraud and harassment. Third, work with Patricia to legally separate my finances from Liam's so that no future damage could reach me. It was a blueprint for survival, one I intended to follow meticulously. As night fell, I stepped outside to the porch. The breeze from the harbor brushed across my face, cool and grounding. A slow-moving cargo ship passed in the distance, its lights drifting across the dark water like a promise that life continued even through storms. I felt the first faint sense of calm I had experienced in days. The path forward would not be easy, but at least now it was visible. If you're still watching and you're ready to see how everything unfolds, comment number 8 below so I know you're staying to the end. Now get ready for the final chapters. The morning of the hearing arrived colder than any winter day I could remember, the kind of cold that settled deep into my bones. I walked into the courthouse in Charleston with a steady stride, feeling the weight of months of turmoil begin to loosen, thread by thread. The courtroom was crowded with reporters, attorneys, and several people who had once been victims of Claire's schemes. Their quiet presence reminded me that what happened to me was part of a larger pattern, and this final step was necessary. When Claire was led inside, her confidence evaporated the moment the prosecution displayed the collected evidence. The recordings revealed her planning each step, down to the falsified medical emergencies and the proposed strategy to access my financial accounts. One of her former victims from Texas took the stand, speaking with calm determination about the identical fraud she had endured years earlier. I watched Claire's face fall, her practiced composure slipping away as every carefully crafted lie unraveled. Barrett followed, more brittle than defiant. The recordings left no room for denial. His involvement in spreading threats and aiding Claire was fully exposed. The court assigned him a sentence involving mandatory supervision, restitution, and a lifetime ban on any contact. His shoulders sagged as the decision was read, the false bravado he once wielded nowhere to be found. Liam sat in the back, smaller and quieter than I remembered. When called, he admitted everything without embellishment. He spoke of manipulation, guilt, and the slow erosion of judgment that had brought him to the edge of disaster. He told the court about his therapy, his work in the warehouse, and the changes he was trying to anchor within himself. His honesty earned leniency. The court acknowledged his cooperation and decided against prosecution, a mercy he had worked hard to deserve. When it was my turn to speak, I kept my words grounded. I did not condemn Liam. Instead, I spoke about boundaries, about reclaiming dignity after betrayal, and about the responsibility we each carry to protect our lives when others attempt to consume them. A hush fell over the room. Even the judge seemed to listen with softened eyes. The final verdict was clear. Claire and Barrett would serve time and pay restitution. My assets were secure. A restraining order was placed for years to come. As I stepped outside, the winter wind struck my face, but for the first time in months, it felt clean. Liam waited a few feet away, unsure and hopeful. I gave him a small nod. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. I walked forward, leaving the courthouse behind, knowing my life was finally my own again. Several weeks passed after the sentencing, and life began to soften around the edges again. Charleston's winter light felt different now, calmer, as if the world had finally exhaled with me. My small house near the shoreline became a quiet refuge where I relearned how to breathe without the weight of fear or betrayal pressing down on my chest. Each morning, the sun rose over the water with a gentleness I had forgotten existed, and each evening the waves carried away a little more of the heaviness that had settled inside me. In the stillness of those days, I began to look inward. I faced the truth that I had ignored my own limits for far too long and allowed love to disguise warning signs I should have seen. Yet facing those truths did not break me. They steadied me. I realized forgiveness was not something I owed anyone else. It was a release I owed myself. Liam continued therapy and his work at the warehouse. When we last met on the old bench behind my house, there were long silences, but they were no longer sharp or painful. There was an uneasy hope between us, a small beginning that might grow in its own time. I found new purpose in sharing my story with others who had been betrayed by family. Through a local support organization, I met people who carried wounds like mine, and helping them reminded me that pain can be reshaped into strength. One morning, I stood on the sand and felt the wind move through me. I understood then that what I had lost no longer defined me. What defined me was that I had stood back up. I walked forward, letting the day open wide before me. When the dust finally settles after a long season of hurt, something unexpected begins to take shape: clarity. Not the kind that arrives loudly, but the quiet clarity that grows in the spaces where pain once lived. Healing is never linear, and closure rarely comes wrapped neatly. Yet there is undeniable strength in choosing to rise, to draw boundaries, and to trust that letting go is sometimes the most loving act we can offer ourselves. Life has a way of reminding us that loss does not define us. The courage to start again does. And in that courage, we rediscover who we are meant to become. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. Your presence here means more than you know. If this journey moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice might be the encouragement someone else needs today. And do not forget to follow and subscribe so you never miss the next story.